Deriving the quadratic formula. So let's say we have a quadratic in the form of y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Remember, completing the square was used to find the zeros of a quadratic. In other words, to find where it crosses the x-axis. And so to know that, we have to make y equal to 0. When y is 0, we know that the x will tell us that will be the x-intercept, right? So we're finding the zeros here. Is there an E there?
No.
Zero is? No?
No.
Okay. All right. Now if these were numbers like 4 and 3 and 2, this would seem a lot more familiar. We're going to do the exact same procedure we've been doing with completing the square, except we're going to do it with letters. Okay? So step 1 in completing the square is to move the constant term over. So I'm going to subtract c from both sides. That's going to give me negative c equals ax squared plus bx. Now, could I write it ax squared plus bx equals negative c? Yeah, it's the same thing. So I would recommend in your notes you write it whichever way you're more comfortable with. If you would rather write this side first, that's totally fine. The reason we did this was the first step in completing the square is to subtract the constant term. Okay. The next thing that we did when we were completing the square was divide everything by a. So what I'm trying to do here is to write, and I hope in your notes you can do this too, to write kind of the step that we're actually doing in between. Right? So maybe I'll write it like this. Because I want you to be able to see what the equation looks like at each phase. So here's what the equation looked like at this phase. Here's what it looks like now. This is what we're doing. We're dividing by a. And now it looks like this. Negative c over a equals a divided by a is just 1. So I have x squared plus b over a x. So I'm just combining the A, B, C letters together where possible. And I'm treating the x as sort of a separate quantity. Because the A, B, C letters, those represent numbers. X is just representing the variable x.
So step 2 is divide by a.
Yeah, so here we're dividing by a. And if a were negative, then we would divide by, a negative number. Divide by a. What's the next step in completing the square? After we have the constant over here, we have x squared isolated. Yeah?
Factor it.
Yeah, we factor it. And so we take half of the coefficient on x, so b over 2a is half of that, and square it. When we square that, we get b squared over 4a squared. And we add that to both sides. So I'm going to rewrite this kind of as 2 separate steps, just so you can, again, really see what it looks like at each phase. So down here, I'm going to add b squared over 4a squared. I'm going to add b squared over 4a squared. had up here, which is going to give me negative c over a plus b squared over 4a squared equals x squared plus b over ax plus b squared over 4a squared. Okay. I add to make a perfect square. That's the step that I just did. So you said factor it. This is kind of, before I can factor it, I have to add something, right? Now I need to factor this. What do I get when I factor this? Keep in mind that when we took half of this, that gave us a clue right here about our factoring. Yeah?
Would it be x plus b over 2a in parentheses squared
Exactly.
equals...
Yeah. And you could FOIL this out and it would equal this. Okay? But for now we're just going to trust that doing this little step here gave us the number that we want to put down here. And this side stays the same. I am now going to try to combine this. So I'm going to do this in kind of a couple steps. So I'm going to start way over here. I have negative c over a plus b squared over 4a squared. In order to combine those, I need to multiply this times 4a over 4a. It's going to give me negative 4ac. I'm just writing this in order, like alphabetical order essentially. So negative 4, so here's my negative, right? Here's my 4, here's my a, here's my c. I multiplied all those together to get negative 4ac plus b squared over, this is a times 4a, which is the same as 4a squared. So my denominator is 4a squared. Okay. All I did was combine these two fractions to get one fraction.
And the entire thing is negative.
Well, there's a negative right here. There's a negative on the 4ac. But the b squared is not negative, right? And the bottom is not negative. All right. What's the next step in completing the square?
Don't we simplify the fraction now?
Well, I would simplify this if there were a way to simplify it.
Like, couldn't we simplify out like for 4a?
I could, except that there's no 4a in this term right here. Right? I
Okay,
can't just take it out of here and here. I have to take it out of every term. And this term is just b squared. So there's no 4a to take out of there.
Okay, so we couldn't, like, we could take out the a from the top to get rid of the a squared on the bottom.
Right. We could if there were an a in this term. But there's not. So there's nothing that we can simplify. I love that you're looking for a way to simplify that. Because if we could simplify it, that would be awesome. But since this term has no b, and this term has only b's, there's not really going to be a way to simplify it in this case. So what do I do next? I have something squared. Yeah.
You square root it.
Yeah, so I square root. Okay, I guess I need to add a step here, right? Before, this was factor. And I sort of did two things here. I factored and I combined the fractions. And now I'm going to square root. this. And the square root of this. Okay, I'm going to erase that though because, again, I'm trying to kind of preserve each step. So this goes to the square root of negative 4ac plus b squared over 4a squared.
You can't take any of those out. Oh.
We will be able to.
Oh,
This goes to the square root of x plus b over 2a squared. Okay, I'm going to move up here in your notes. Just keep going down the page. So I can simplify this. How can I simplify the left-hand side there?
2. Even the square root of
Yeah, the square root of 4 down here is 2. So what I'm doing here, I'm going to write out every step. I'm taking the square root of the top and the square root of the bottom, because that is what the square root of a fraction is. It's the same thing as the square root of the top and the square root of a bottom. On the other side, I just have x plus b over 2a, because the square root of a square cancels out. Now what can I do here? Yeah.
So on the bottom you can just have 2a.
Uh-huh. The square root of 4a squared is 2a. This, there's really nothing I can do. I will tell you that typically this is written like this. The square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So we just write the b squared first and we put the minus in between instead of having the negative out front. What am I missing here though? There's another really important thing that we always do at this stage. When we take the square root, what do? Is the square root of 4 2?
Yeah.
Is it always 2?
Oh,
Yeah.
plus or minus.
Plus or minus. So I'm going to have the plus or minus. Remember we always put that in our numerator when we were doing these problems with numbers? So I'm going to write plus or minus right here. I think that barely shows up. Okay. So plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Last step, I want to get x alone. What do I have to do? This is my last step. Yeah. I'm going to subtract b over 2a. And where am I going to write that? Am I going to write it to the right or to the left of this? Yeah, we always write it in front of the plus or minus, right? So I have minus b over 2a, right? And then I have this other fraction, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a equals x. Okay, I'm not quite done. I'm just circling that so you can see it a little bit easier. Why am I not quite done? What is left to do here? I have x isolated, which is what the goal of completing the square is. What else can I do? Yeah.
You can combine the fractions.
I can combine these two fractions because they have the same denominator. So instead of writing it that way, I'm going to write negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Make sure you've got each step down in your notes. Typically the quadratic formula is written like this. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Yeah.
How come deriving the quadratic formula is the same as completing the square?
Because that's where it comes from. Yeah. All we did was complete the square with a generic.
And is that the quadratic formula for everything? And then
So,
you just plug the numbers
let
in?
me erase this, yes. So now, you never have to complete the square ever again, unless someone tells you to. Which is really exciting. That's awesome, right? If someone gives you an equation, y equals 4, I always have to slow down a little because I want to write a squared now, but or like 4a squared plus 3b, but it's with x's, right? What does the 4 represent? That's a, right? That's a. Something like 4x squared plus 8x plus 2. And they say, find the zeros. This is all you have to do. A equals 4. B equals 8. C equals 2. You guys see where I got those numbers from?
Yeah.
Okay. Quadratic formula says x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of, oops, I messed up, b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All I have to do is plug this in. X equals negative b is negative 8 plus or minus the square root of b squared is 8 squared minus 4, oops, minus 4 minus a, which is also 4, times c, all over 2 times a. And you'll get really used to just solving these and combining like terms. We have negative 8 out front, plus or minus the square root of 64 minus 4 times 4 is 16 times 2 is 32 over 2 times 4 is 8. So we have negative 8 plus or minus the square root. 64 minus 32 is 32 over 8.
Are we still learning algebra 1?
Yes. Yeah. This is a huge part of algebra 1. Yeah. You will need to memorize this one at some point. Not today, but. And then we try to simplify this any way that we can. Right? Assuming that I did everything correctly. What? Yeah, so remember here that I can't reduce this with this.
So would that be your answer?
So I could leave my answer like this, except there's a 4 in here. I'm not going to worry about that. Let's just leave it like this for now.
Because you could split up the square root and then it could be 4
Wait, what happened to the 64?
times it's negative and then negative 4
Yeah.
times
What happened to the square root of
6. What is 64 minus 32?
negative 8
Oh,
plus
32.
negative 4 plus minus
Okay. Now, will this also work for things that you can factor? Yeah, totally. Right? Let's think of one that we know how to factor. I don't necessarily think it's easier. So if I had like y equals x squared plus 3x plus 2, I could use the quadratic formula to solve this. A is 1, B is 3, C is 2. So I'm going to go negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Now I'm going to try to solve this. So negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 minus 4 times 2 is 8 over 2. Oh, look at this. Square root of 1. What is the square root of 1? 9 minus 8 is 1, right? Square root of 1 is 1. So negative 3 plus or minus 1 over 2. Negative 3 plus 1 over 2
Would be
is negative 2 over 2, which is negative 1. Or negative 3 minus 1 over 2 is negative 4 over 2, which is negative 2. So if you could have, but I probably, chances are factoring this would have been faster, because I would have gone x plus 2 times x plus 1, x equals negative 2 or negative 1. But the quadratic formula will get us the same answers. Okay? Now the tricky thing about assigning homework around this, that sort of thing, I would recommend if you see a problem like this, you factor it to solve it. But that's not going to help you practice the quadratic formula. Right? And if it's not factorable, you're going to get something weird like this. So that's like, it seems a little harder in a way. So when I give you homework over this, I'm going to try to give you ones that you can factor at first so that the numbers come out even. It just feels more satisfying in the end. But just keep in mind, you could have factored it, and you probably would have been faster solving it by factor. What are we doing though? The goal of the homework is to practice using this thing right here. Make sure you have this written down very obviously in your notes. X equals negative b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That is the quadratic formula. This will allow you to solve any quadratic in the world, in the universe, in the realm of mathematics. Right?
Until we discover the
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Mira has a song for you guys.
Oh, this one.
Yeah, it's actually